Have you ever gazed upon a portrait of a Victorian woman, marveling at her poise, her elegance, the sheer architectural marvel of her attire? Those enormous, bell-shaped gowns, the layers upon layers of petticoats, the impossibly small waist. They are images of pure, untouchable refinement. But have you ever allowed a more unsettling question to creep into your mind? Beneath that pristine facade, under the crushing weight of whalebone and silk, surrounded by a fortress of fabric, how did she simply go to the bathroom? The question feels almost vulgar to ask, a crude intrusion into a picture of perfection. But the answer is far more shocking than you could ever imagine. It's a secret hidden in plain sight, a story of discomfort, ingenuity, and bodily functions that defies our modern sensibilities. Prepare yourselves, because tonight, we will lift the layers of Victorian propriety and uncover the truly astonishing, and sometimes horrifying, toilet habits concealed beneath those enormous dresses. What you are about to hear will change the way you see this era forever. To truly comprehend the shocking realities hidden beneath Victorian gowns, we must first immerse ourselves in the suffocating world that created them. The Victorian era was a time of profound contradiction. Society celebrated industrial innovation and imperial might, yet it imposed upon its women a set of ideals rooted in fragility and denial. The perfect woman was an angel in the house, a concept popularized by poets and writers of the time. She was expected to be a bastion of morality, purity, and domestic serenity. Crucially, this meant she was to be perceived as existing above the messy, vulgar realities of the physical body. Perspiration, appetite, and certainly all bathroom-related functions were considered deeply unfeminine, base instincts to be suppressed and, above all, hidden. A lady's clothing was the primary tool for enforcing this illusion. It was not engineered for life, but for display, a beautiful, elaborate cage that advertised her husband's or father's wealth while physically restricting her to a placid, decorative existence. The sheer mechanics of this attire were staggering. Let's build the layers from the skin out. First, a chemise, a simple linen shift. Over this came the corset, a device of whalebone and steel that forcibly cinched the waist, compressed the ribs, and pushed the organs up or down, often causing chronic health problems. Then came the corset cover, followed by numerous petticoats to create volume. By the 1850s, this volume became so extreme that the crinoline cage was invented, a literal dome of flexible steel hoops that could expand a skirt to a ridiculous circumference. Finally, the dress itself, often made of heavy fabrics like velvet or wool, was lowered over this entire construction. The total weight of this ensemble could easily exceed 14 kilograms, all of it hanging from a severely constricted torso. Now, consider the fundamental problem. Encased in this fortress of fabric and steel, how did a woman perform the most basic human function? The answer lies in the most intimate layer of clothing, the drawers. And here we uncover our first secret, one that shatters the pristine image of the era. For much of the 19th century, a respectable lady's drawers were not a single, joined garment. They were, essentially, two separate fabric tubes for the legs, connected only by a waistband. They were completely open at the crotch. This wasn't a fashion quirk, it was the only viable, albeit deeply flawed, solution. The design allowed a woman, with considerable effort, to position herself over a chamber pot or a rudimentary toilet without undertaking the impossible task of undressing. It was a feat of secret acrobatics, performed while the upper body remained rigid and poised. For the wealthy, a lady's maid was indispensable, discreetly sliding the chamber pot under the vast skirt and removing it afterward, all while her mistress pretended nothing was happening. This seems like a clever, if awkward, solution. But we must consider the dire implications for hygiene. This open design meant that for the entire day, a woman had virtually no barrier between her body and the world. Victorian cities were notoriously filthy. Streets were choked with horse manure, rotting garbage, coal soot, and human waste often tossed from windows. Skirts, with their enormous hems, dragged directly through this mire, collecting unimaginable filth. Any splash from a passing carriage or a misstep into a puddle posed a direct threat. In an age with a budding but incomplete understanding of germ theory, and with no antibiotics, this constant exposure could lead to rampant infections. The solution of the split drawers was merely a starting point, a compromise that solved one problem while creating a host of others. And it was a solution that only worked if a private toilet was immediately available. What happened when a woman was trapped in a long carriage ride, a visit to a friend's house, or a seemingly endless church service? That is when the situation escalated from merely unhygienic to truly desperate. This is just the beginning. The open-crotch drawer was a baseline solution for a life lived largely indoors, near a designated chamber pot. But the moment a Victorian woman stepped out of her home, she entered a world with virtually no public accommodations for her. The concept of a public restroom for ladies was non-existent for much of the era. So, what was a woman to do during a day-long shopping trip, a lengthy train journey, or a social event that could last for 6 to 8 hours? The answers reveal a level of desperation and a secret world of concealed sanitation that is both ingenious and deeply unsettling. For situations where one simply had to go, but there was nowhere to go to, a special device was invented, the Bourdaloue. Named after a famous 17th century French priest whose sermons were notoriously long, the Bourdaloue was a small, handheld urinal for women, shaped much like a modern gravy boat, often made of porcelain or silver. This was a woman's most private and essential accessory for public life. A lady, feeling the urgent need, would find a moment of relative privacy, perhaps in a curtained alcove, the corner of a garden, or even within a crowded ballroom where the sheer size of her skirt provided a personal tint. With the assistance of a maid acting as a lookout, she would carefully lift her layers, position the Bourdaloue, and relieve herself, all while attempting to remain standing or seated with perfect composure. The full, warm vessel would then have to be discreetly handed off to her maid, who was tasked with the perilous journey of carrying it through the event to dispose of its contents outside. The entire operation was a masterpiece of stealth, a silent conspiracy of women against a world not built for them. Imagine the sheer nerve it required, the steady hand needed to avoid a disastrous spill, the clinking of porcelain a constant threat, the terror of discovery which would mean instant social ruin. A single drop on a silk hem could create a scandal. This practice forces us to confront the sensory reality of the Victorian era. We imagine these grand balls as scenes of perfume and polished floors, but the reality was likely very different. With dozens, if not hundreds, of women potentially resorting to such measures, the air would have been thick with more than just conversation. The risk of spillage was immense, and the heavy, rarely washed fabrics of their dresses would have trapped odors for weeks. This wasn't just about inconvenience, it was a constant battle against the body's betrayal. The discomfort was immense. Women suffered from urinary tract infections, skin chafing from perpetually damp undergarments, and the constant, gnawing anxiety of their own biology. The problem was compounded exponentially during menstruation, a topic so taboo it was almost never spoken of, creating a monthly crisis of hygiene that is difficult for us to even fathom. The solutions were rudimentary, often involving rags or ineffective pads, and when combined with the daily toilet challenges, it painted a picture of perpetual, hidden misery. But even the Bourdaloue was a luxury, a tool for the upper classes. What about the millions of working-class women? Or what happened in situations so public, so exposed, that even a secret porcelain pot was not an option? The truth is, sometimes, there was no solution at all. We have peeled back the layers of silk and propriety. We've uncovered the pragmatic, if unhygienic, design of the split drawers. We have revealed the desperate ingenuity of the Bourdaloue, that secret porcelain vessel for public emergencies. Each of these revelations chips away at the pristine portrait of the Victorian lady, showing us a woman in a constant, hidden struggle with her own body. But we have, until now, assumed one thing, that these strategies worked. We have assumed that with enough planning, stealth, and assistance, a woman could successfully manage her bodily needs. We now arrive at the final layer, at the most shocking and closely guarded secret of them all. We arrive at the moment when there was no private corner, no available maid, no time to use a hidden device. The moment when the body's demands were absolute and unstoppable. What happened then? The answer is as simple as it is horrifying. Nothing. She did nothing. She simply sat or stood, her expression a perfect mask of calm indifference, and let it happen. The ultimate, final, and most frequently used solution to a woman's urgent need for the toilet was to relieve herself directly into her own clothing. This was not a rare, catastrophic accident. For many, it was a calculated, accepted, and unspoken strategy for survival in a society that offered no alternative. Her enormous dress, the very symbol of her confinement, became her final, desperate tool. It was a portable, private toilet, but also a prison of filth. Let us paint a picture. Imagine a young woman at her first high society ball. She is laced into her corset so tightly she can barely breathe. For hours, she has been dancing, sipping lukewarm lemonade, and making polite conversation, all while a painful, pressing urgency builds within her. She cannot leave. It would be a grave social misstep. There is no ladies' retiring room. Her mate is nowhere in sight. The panic rises, cold and sharp. She is trapped. And so, in a brief moment between conversations, perhaps as she turns to admire our floral arrangement, she makes a silent calculation and surrenders. She stands perfectly still, a polite smile fixed on her face, while a stream of warmth floods the layers of her undergarments. The immediate sensation is one of relief, but it is instantly replaced by a wave of clammy horror. The multiple layers of her chemise and flannel petticoats, perhaps as many as 6 or 7 of them, act as a crude, absorbent padding. Their job is to soak up the evidence, to prevent any telltale damp spot from reaching the priceless silk of the outer gown. She must now endure the rest of the evening, potentially for hours, sitting in her own waste. She feels the cold dampness seep into her skin, the chafing begin. She is paranoid about the smell, praying the general miasma of unwashed bodies, heavy perfumes, and gas lighting in the crowded room will mask her secret. She must continue to smile, to converse, to appear as the epitome of effortless grace, all while her undergarments are soiled. This was the silent, disgusting reality hidden beneath the fantasy of Victorian elegance. It was a constant source of urinary tract infections, kidney disease, and agonizing skin conditions that doctors of the era discreetly referred to as female complaints. The most profound secret wasn't a hidden pot or a special piece of clothing. It was the raw, unsanitized truth of the body, silently rebelling inside a gilded cage. We began with a simple, almost crude question about the toilet habits of Victorian women beneath their enormous dresses. We journeyed from clever, open-crotched drawers to the desperate ingenuity of the Bourdaloue, and finally, to the grim, silent reality of women forced to use their own clothing as a toilet. The secrets concealed by those gowns were not just about hygiene. They were about survival in a world that simultaneously worshipped and punished the female form. The shocking truth is that the very symbol of a woman's status and purity, her elaborate dress, was often the site of her deepest humiliation and physical discomfort. This colossal contradiction reveals more than just historical trivia. It exposes the fundamental nature of social control. The Victorian era didn't just restrict women with laws and social codes. It physically imprisoned them in fabrics and steel, creating a cage so effective that it forced the body itself into a state of perpetual crisis. This legacy of shame and silence surrounding women's bodies did not simply vanish when the crinoline fell out of fashion. It has echoed through generations, subtly shaping our modern world. The idea that female bodily functions are inherently embarrassing, something to be hidden at all costs, persists to this day in the discreet packaging of menstrual products and the coded language we use for female anatomy and health. The historical dismissal of women's agonizing medical issues as mere female complaints finds its modern parallel in the ongoing struggle for women to have their pain and symptoms taken seriously by medical establishments. The fight for adequate, safe, and plentiful public restrooms for women is a direct continuation of the battle that Victorian women lost every single day. While the corsets may now be metaphorical, taking the form of impossible beauty standards, relentless social media pressures, or restrictive corporate expectations, the core idea remains the same. A woman's body is a battlefield, and her comfort and health are often seen as secondary to the performance of an ideal. The story of the Victorian woman's toilet habits is, therefore, not a grotesque footnote in history. It is a profound lesson in the human cost of manufactured perfection. It teaches us that whenever a society imposes an ideal that is fundamentally at odds with human biology, the result is not elegance, but silent, hidden suffering. It is a stark reminder that controlling a person's body is the most effective way to control their spirit and their freedom. So, the next time you gaze upon a portrait of a serene Victorian woman, look beyond the placid expression and the magnificent gown. See the prisoner within the palace of her own clothing, and remember the silent, desperate war she was forced to wage against her own body, a war whose battles, victories, and defeats were hidden from sight, buried deep beneath the enormous weight of her beautiful dress.